Hi, and welcome back to Transvox. And it's my pleasure to welcome back Joanne Lockwood, who's sitting in front of me. I'm not sure which order they're coming out in, Joe, but this could be the third of three, the second of three, who knows? But there are three podcasts in this little series. And today we're going to talk today about thought leadership, which is what's the future for trans people? And is there a new way of thinking about things? Perhaps is there a new, more contentious, more challenging way of thinking about what the problems might be? And not just thinking about the problems, but potentially those solutions. So, first of all, welcome back, Joe. How are you doing?
Good, good. As you were doing that intro, one of three, four of five, whatever. I've always wanted to be seven of nine. Yeah, that was
Oh, who hasn't?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But no, I'm good, and no doubt in the next weeks or month or so, we're going to start seeing how trans people will be expected to conform, behave, and the restrictions that are going to be coded into law.
yes,
But I do wonder what the debate is. What are people looking to do? We're in a pretty tough situation at the moment where even if you're tweaking the nuances of the stat guidance, it doesn't fundamentally change the
yeah,
trajectory of it. And we're a long way back from the stat guidance that was put out in the wake of the Equality Act 2010. I think there's a 2011, 2010 guidance that went out then. It was basically, I said, treat trans people as their required gender in all respects. And what we're seeing now is a U-turn of that, where that's not the guidance. And if anything, it's almost trying to restrict trans people completely. So yeah, unless the government decide to change the law or the interpretation of the law as reinterpreted or as interpreted by the Supreme Court, then all I can see is it's going to get a lot tougher and a lot harder for organizations who want to be inclusive of trans people to be inclusive of trans people with a
yeah,
feeling that they're going to come under pressure to protect women. Yeah, but there's nothing in the Equality Act that says they must exclude. But it's the
yeah,
interpretation of that is being weaponized, and
yeah,
I feel a bit for employers and service providers because it is it's the problem of the employer and service provider to deal with this, and
yeah,
not it is my problem as well, but not really, because my solution to this is say, okay, so how are you going to treat me then? And
mm,
I'm now going to look at you and say, you need to treat me with dignity and respect as a woman, and how are you going
mm,
to do that without making me feel excluded or marginalized or othered or pushed into a third space. So you've got the
yeah,
challenge here. And I don't think many employers or service providers are really geared up for that challenge. They're just seeing it as, okay, we'll jump on this sex exclusionary route and ignoring the protected characteristics of gender reassignment. So I,
yeah,
I think there's a lot more lawyers and a lot more litigation to happen, a lot more employment tribunals, a lot more discrimination cases that are going to come up, and we're gonna be spending a lot of time in court
yeah,
listening to these debates. We're seeing a
yeah,
few already. It's not going to do anybody any good. So I'm certainly encouraging employers and service providers to look long and hard at exclusion and say, really test their proportionality and whether it is the best solution, because the Equality Act does not say exclude, because the Equality Act is about including and equality,
yes.
not about division.
But the thing is now we've got people in the trans community saying we need to be out of the Equality Act to put so we're more protected because it's the Equality Act that's gone wrong. But then and this is part of the bigger plan, isn't it? That you get the situation where no one can afford to be outside the Equalities Act because actually if it supports what is giving us all the rights that we have, freedom of expression, marriage, religious doodles,
Yeah, well,
it removes all of our freedoms. And these are freedoms which are designed to protect us against the state. That's what these freedoms are about, aren't they?
it's not the state. It's putting an onus on employers and service providers to treat people with dignity and respect. It's all underpinning what I would call the FREEDA principles. So FREEDA stands for fairness, respect, equality, dignity, and autonomy. It's upholding that. It's underpinning the basic premise of the Human Rights Act that everybody should be treated with dignity and respect. And the key word there is everybody. There's no hierarchy of that. And that's the premise. And the Equality Act underpins that. So when we're talking about pulling out of the European Court of Human Rights, when we talk about Article 8 watering down, when we talk about that, what we're trying to do here is water down everybody's rights, not just trans people. And if they're
Mm,
looking to do it to allow people to be deported easier or to
that's it.
sort immigration out, that's going to have a negative impact on a lot of people. And it's one of these things where if you pull one thread, you end up unpicking something somewhere else. So, yeah, to hear some of the right-wing rhetoric saying we're just going to pull out of this and pull out of that and lose the Equality Act, it was pretty brutal. The Equality Act does still protect us.
Yeah.
Without the Equality Act, people could treat us like they want and there'd be no
Well,
recourse.
America.
So, what we need to do is we need to look at what rights we do have and use them. And yeah, to quote the commissioners and to quote the chair of the EHRC,
Mm.
things are going to change. And yeah, you could argue that the rights that trans people were using and had weren't actually rights; they were stolen ground. Or you could
Mm.
argue that actually they're just human rights and it's treating us with dignity and respect. And again, that's the confusion where there seems to be this binary, a biological interpretation now
Yeah.
of who's good enough, and some people are weaponizing that, as we know. And it still needs to be acquiesced. It still needs to be leveled. It still needs to be figured out. And we're still not sure where the courts are going to go with some of this. People who have gender critical views have a very polarized, absolute type perspective, which may or may not be supported by the courts. Who knows? But I think one thing that is key to a lot of this is that public opinion has shifted a lot over the last 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years, maybe since
Yeah.
2016, 2017, 2018. Trans people were basically celebrated, supported, acknowledged. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we're now being seen as bad, evil, aversive, hurting children. Yeah, all the things we had before, they're coming back into play. And I think one of the challenges we have now is that public opinion has swung. And there's something called the Overton window. Yeah,
That's
the
right.
Overton
Yeah.
window is what is acceptable in society. And we as trans people, gender diverse people, gender non-conforming people, haven't moved, but the window of acceptability has shifted right.
Yes.
So everything we stand for, we haven't moved with the window. So what we're saying is, hang on a minute, this was all good. Yeah, but what society believes is now over
Yeah.
here, and we're outside of that. So that's the challenge we've got. 5 years ago, if we said, "Whoa, this is so unfair," the media, the politicians, everyone go, "You're right, this is so unfair." Now people are going, "Well, yeah, we need to debate that. Yeah, yeah, it's not that simple. Women and girls,
Mm.
ooh, sport, ooh, prisons, ooh, refugees, oh, yeah, young people, ooh, out,
Mm.
ooh, you evil trans people, you're trying to indoctrinate with your ideology." And that
Mm.
seems to be the common thinking that, as I say, that is now the acceptable view of trans people because the window shifted around us. So before we can expect to try and even hold the rope, and I keep saying hold the rope, we've got to try and make sure that window doesn't go any further to the right. And
Yeah.
sometimes
Which it
not,
will.
which inevitably it will.
Yeah.
And
We're
we've
in a
got to try
proper
and figure that out.
pendulum. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're in a proper pendulum. This pendulum has been to the right, and we've had a long period of progressive liberalism, and it's
Mm.
swinging back, and it's only just beginning to swing. So things are going to really change. And the thing about women and girls is ridiculous. I was just looking when you were chatting there about, there's been 69,184 sexual offences recorded by police. 36% of those being rape offences, 2024, 2025. This is not about protecting women and girls because they're the figures. And I would have said probably the fingers of one hand, which have been offences committed by trans people. So there will be some, because there are some people who, oddly enough, their offences are counted after they've transitioned, which I find is quite an interesting thing. You often find people who have committed an offence, go into prison, and then transition, and their count is that offence becomes a trans offence. So that's quite interesting. But anyway, we need to think about the future because actually we all know the problem. So let's talk about your ideas around the future, because you've been thinking a bit more radically about this, and you're coming up with a sort of a strategy and some thoughts about how a new playbook could be produced to think about in the bigger picture how in
Yeah,
a sense
it's
how we can start to build out.
the biggest challenge we have is we as a community are not a community.
We're
Uh,
not a community.
we're not a
I've
community.
never said that. Yeah. We're a demographic.
a group of people
Yeah.
who share a protected characteristic, and we hang out. In fact, I don't consider myself part of the LGBTQ plus community, really. I'm a woman. I hang out in the wide world, my business and professional life. And if I didn't happen to talk about being trans occasionally, I probably wouldn't talk about trans at all. And I think most trans people I know
I'm the same.
aim at transitioning is not to hang around being a trans person, is to get on with your life in your required gender, with your family, with your friends, and just get on with things. So we've never been a community as such. We tend to be on the back foot, victimized by things, trying to fight back. We're not really organized in that way. And that's one of the troubles we have is that the
Mm.
people who have gender critical views seem to be very well organized, very strategic. And you can plot back the strategic plan back to 2015, 2016. I think we can look at
Well, earlier than that,
earlier than
if
that.
you
I mean,
look
some of
back
the stuff in the
into the
States.
70s,
Yeah,
1970s, the
yeah,
Christian nationalism was getting
yeah.
going. After Roe v. Wade, this movement started to be funded then, I think.
You look at people like Helen Joyce, my for starter, some of the books,
Yeah,
some of the thinking they came out with, that became more mainstream in their world
yeah,
in 2016, 2017. And I have to take my hat off to them. It's been a masterful exercise
yeah,
in strategic
mm,
attack and ground taking, yeah, and
yeah,
makes Russia's invasion of the Donbass look pedestrian.
yeah,
They're probing, they're plotting, they're looking at test cases, they're investing, and they're
yeah.
trying to steal case by case
And funding.
in the law. And they've done that very effectively. And they're already 5 years ahead,
Yeah,
planning for the next 5 to 10 years. And we're still worrying, we're looking at our navels, we're looking at our toes, we're still worrying about where we are today.
yeah,
And we, as a community, need to become a community. And there's many organizations beyond Reflections doing stuff, but transactional, translucent, trans in the city.
mm,
There's a lot of groups out there now starting to become more organized, but we're still not seeing a lot of strategy. We're still not looking at a lot of, I call it competitor analysis. And I've done some of this. I've pulled some documents together looking at organizations that I've mentioned already. I'm not going to keep mentioning them, how they're approaching this and how we need to be organized to be strategic. And we've got to stop, we've almost got to stop fighting on the ramparts right now and
mm,
look at the bigger goal. And it may well be, to use an analogy, we may need to give up the Donbass and accept that Russia is not going to give those back. We may need to accept that some of the things we thought we had, we've lost.
mm,
Crimea, Donbass, and that may well be sport. It may well be this, that, and the other. That because this Overton window has shifted so far, some of those things society just doesn't see as acceptable. We can't just go and say, hang on a minute. I think what we have to, and I hate to say this is not being defeatist, but it's recognizing the ground we still do have and what we can defend, what is defensible, what is believable,
mm,
what is still in the hearts and minds of people in general society. Because that's how we've got to push back. We've got to get the cisgender, the average person in the street, the average family person, to get back on our side, to be able to steal
mm,
some of this window back to where we are, or at least stop it going any further. And I think what we end up doing is we try and defend the indefensible. And you can say to your blue in the face that trans people who've been on hormones, who've had surgery or whatever it may be, who transitioned years ago, have no physical advantage in sport. You can say it to your blue in the face. You can quote evidence, you can get reports, you
mm,
can come up with everything you want to do. But people who have a different opinion will have their own reports, their own evidence,
mm,
and they have their own ways of trying to persuade you. They'll find a one-off test case of a 6'2" person and a 5'2" person and say, does that look fair to you? And of
mm.
course you look at it and go, well, no, of course it's not fair. See, my point is proven. Trans people have an unfair advantage. And you cannot defeat that easily
No.
in the court of public opinion by saying the other bit. It makes people look indefensible. It makes people look
So, so,
unreasonable.
so just coming in there for a second. So there's two or three things that strike me. One, which is you're right, it's been clearly well organized, it's been well funded, and that needs to be addressed For me, I think you have to be much more strategic about what you give up because there are things like Victoria McLeod's campaigns to attack the law and such like, which still have to go ahead. I do think there's a period where we have to step back and also be more strategic about stuff. And I think that's really important. For me, the key thing is here that gender critical people have a narrative they can coalesce around. And that's what we're missing. We're missing
Oh,
that
yeah.
three or four word phrase, which is the thing that people get behind. And if you talk to, and I was talking to someone about this and saying, oh, but it isn't a three or four word phrase. And I was saying that's the point. It has to be, because the way comms, if you look at Tim Allen, who is a genius of communications, used to be working with Tony Blair and such, and of course went to Sex Matters and has now joined the Labour Party.
Yeah. Get
They
Brexit
talk
done.
about,
It's all this kind
yeah,
of these sound bites. And sex
exactly.
matters, whether you like it or not, you can
It's
get behind
great.
it. You know
Yeah,
exactly what it says. Sex
it's
matters.
well
Yeah.
funded.
Yeah.
Very well funded with very famous people sitting behind the movement.
Mm.
And we've not recognized the value of this community. We spend too much time in victim mode saying, oh, we're a tiny community, we're helpless, please don't hurt us. Instead of actually saying we're a legitimate part of this community and we have spending power and we should be thinking about the message that
Oh,
it takes,
and we're
which is a
intelligent
positive
and we're
message.
professional and we have contacts
Yeah.
and we're not victims. We're
What would
just
happen to IT in this
yeah.
country if trans people disengaged? It's quite, without being fatuous, there are many places in the world that would be harmed by the lack of trans people. It's time we started shouting about those things.
I did a talk the other day, and I'm going to, as we're talking here, it's there's this the statistical anomaly for one of it, or statistical understanding is that so many people in a room together, once you get above a certain number, the
Mhm.
chances are that more than one person shares the same birthday.
Yeah,
And you can do a very
that's right. Yeah.
similar analysis around trans people. I've got it here. Let me just quickly type it into my document and I can find it for you. But what you can say is how many employees do you need before you guarantee that one of those
Mm.
people is likely going to be trans or gender non-conforming? And so I've got a table here. And
Go on.
it's
Yeah.
so if you think of it as employees, if you've got 10 employees, there's a 5.3% chance that one or more will be trans, but 98% chance that you'll have someone with a trans connection. So
Yes,
creating
that
one
makes more sense.
trans connection. And 0.18% chance of someone being a GRC holder. But if you go all the way up to 100 employees, then 50-50, you're likely to employ somebody. 100% likely that someone's going to have a trans connection. So by the time you get to 100 employees, the chances are you're going to have a trans employee, but
Mm.
you're guaranteed to have somebody in your wider circle who has a trans connection. And if you think about it again in terms of service users, very similar numbers. Yeah, if you have 10 customers, you might have 5% chance of a trans customer. If you've got 250 customers, who doesn't have 250 customers? The chances
Mm.
are 75% chance if you've got 250 customers or people you deal with, 75% chance one of those will be trans. So,
Yeah.
but 100% chance that someone's going to have a trans connection. So once you get to 2,500 customers, the average cinema, the average sports hall, the average whatever, there's a 100% chance you're going to have some people who are trans. We need to recognize that we are out there and employers can't just go, I've got no one here. But we've got to think about the 100% chance that
Mm.
somebody is connected with someone who's trans and that how you're treating your trans employees impacts on your wider circle. Because it may well be that your best customer, your chief exec, your chair of the board, in fact, everybody seems to have a trans relation or a trans friend these days. So we are part of society. And I think what we've got to do is make sure employers and service providers realize that it's
Mm.
not just that one trans person, it's how they are perceived,
Mm.
their brand, their values, and how they treat people.
And I
Completely.
think,
It's how you treat cisgender women who are scared and the young women and the young
yes.
girls. But we know some of that rhetoric is false flag stuff and it's painted to, yeah, we're using the one example of someone bad. And if we applied that logic, then we wouldn't allow any women to become nurses after Lucy Letby. We wouldn't allow anybody to do this because of, we wouldn't allow men to become police officers after
Or
Cousins and
Shipman. Yeah.
Shipman and people like this. So
Mm.
you can't apply the one to the many. And
Yeah.
we keep wheeling out Isla Bryson as being, look, this is what happens when you put trans people in prison. Yeah, one person. And
Mm.
we make stuff up.
Do you think that being this contentious question for you. Do you think being part of the wider LGBTQ population is a useful thing, or has that served its purpose?
We need mates right now, don't we? We need friends. I don't think the time is here to say what we don't need. I think it's probably easier to say what we do need, and we
Mm,
need allies who are not performative. We need people who are going to speak up. We need politicians. We need people with voice. We need people with influence. We need people who are going to stand up and do stuff. I think we have to recognize that people within the wider LGB community don't necessarily get trans people as other trans and other gender diverse people do. But it doesn't mean to say we should be external to that community. We just have to recognize that a cis person is a cis person, whether they're straight, gay, or bi,
mm,
doesn't matter.
mm.
It's the allyship we need. Whether organizations like Stonewall and LGB type charities, whether they're going to accurately represent us, I don't know. I'm not convinced either way on that. I think there's a certain vocal side of the gender critical movement that is the LGB with excluding the T,
Yeah,
but that doesn't speak for the whole gay community in any shape
no.
or form. So I think we've got to be careful when we start trying to divide because that's what people want. They want us to divide and they
Mm,
want us to be isolated. So I don't think
yeah.
today is the right time to say, should we be part of these communities or not? I think we, and I say we,
But it's important to
as a
recognize that
trans community, though, need to have our own advocacy
yeah,
and not rely on organisations like Stonewall. I don't think
yeah,
Stonewall serve us well.
no,
They do a great job. They do some good things out there. But I think we need a voice, whether that's people like Transact or Translucent or another body that comes together. We need to speak for ourselves. And I think outsourcing it to a gay charity isn't necessarily our answer.
yeah. And it's interesting you say that because I work in an LGBT organization as well. And inevitably, the trans issues fall away. And it's been said to me that the trans issues are what was the phrase that was used? They're a distraction that affects the rest of the LGBT community and actually tarnishes the rest of the community. What strikes me is that there's an alliance that's missed between trans people and intersex people because we're caught in the same effectively we're caught in the same piece of poor legislation much more than anybody else is because like it or not intersex people have gender issues not because they're gender questioning but biologically they have issues which mean
Well, if we're down
how they
if we're
present
down to
is different
throat
from their
swabs,
biology.
if we're
Sorry.
swabbing people's cheeks
Yeah,
and doing
exactly.
chromosome tests, then intersex people are well and truly in the crosshairs.
Yeah,
Some intersex people are gender conforming, and some intersex people are gender non-conforming. And as we all know, intersex or DSD is a huge spectrum of people who have different physical characteristics above the shoulders and below the shoulders.
mm,
And yeah, they are probably even more impacted because I was watching someone's YouTube the other day about how they only found out they were intersex,
yeah,
but they couldn't conceive having children.
yeah,
And it turned out that they were 46XY. They had a
yeah,
Y chromosome. And that obviously rocked their entire world. They'd been brought up as a girl. All their friends are girls. They were married as a girl.
mm,
Suddenly they find they've got a Y chromosome and they're biologically indeterminate.
yeah.
So that is a lot different to my experience. I'm not saying my experience is worse or better or different. It's just
No, it's just different.
different. And we have to recognize that these people are suddenly being disenfranchised by this same law that has caught us as well. But we do have to realize that I keep talking about this umbrella. And the trans umbrella is now a golf brolly. It's like a picnic brolly. It's
Mm,
not this pop-up thing we used to have in the old days, where it was like about four different terms. The brolly is so broad and it's so confusing. And who is trans, who isn't trans, who's good enough, who's not good enough, is gender
mm.
non-conforming, is queer or gender. At what point do you become trans enough? And I think that's where some of
And here's the problem. This is
legislation
the heart
went
of the
wrong.
problem.
Yeah,
Mm,
where what the Equality Act and the Gender Recognition Act were doing was defining this term of gender reassignment and embarking on this. And I would imagine, and I wasn't there, but lawmakers and people who were creating these laws didn't imagine the larger TQ plus community of today. They were imagining a trans woman in those days or a trans man in those days, went to the gender clinic, got diagnosed, got hormones, got in a
Mm.
queue for surgery, had
Yeah.
surgery, got on with their life. They were never imagining that people would just declare an identity and that would be it. And the
Yeah.
diversity of
Exactly.
people's identity, expression, and how that comes about was never imagined in law back
Mm.
in the 2010s or the or 2004 when these acts were created, which is why, to a certain extent, when we're looking at reinterpreting the law through today's lens,
Mm.
it looks like it doesn't make sense. So, who is trans enough? Who is the Gender Recognition Act meant to protect?
Yeah.
And I saw an example recently how a transmasculine person was denied a gender recognition certificate because they wanted to give birth and have a child naturally. And I'm thinking, well, if you look at the law, it's you are irrevocably assigning your gender to the opposite, for want of a better way of putting it, and
Mm.
relinquishing your rights as a your birth gender.
Mm.
So if you're a transmasculine person wanting to have a baby, you're not living your masculine role, you're living a feminine role in order to have a baby.
Mm.
There's a real moral dilemma. At what point is this transmasculine person entitled to have a child and a GRC? Can they get a GRC after they've given birth? But then they're a mother while they're breastfeeding. Is breastfeeding then feminine act that they're not relinquishing?
Mm.
So this whole thing is messy, which is why the law doesn't work with mess. The law works with yes, no, black,
Yeah.
white, binary decisions. Under the letter of the law, I can see why this transmasculine person was denied a GRC because they're not relinquishing their assigned sex at birth and acquiring their
Yes.
gender fulfillment. And I think the challenge with many queer, gender diverse, gender non-conforming people is they're not relinquishing, they're not
Mm.
crossing over a threshold into manhood, into womanhood. They're trying to exist in this foot in both camps, which is where the law doesn't work.
It's a non-binary
Yeah,
idea,
the
ideal,
non-binary,
isn't it?
yeah, the fluid, the non-binary,
Yeah.
the various ways of presenting. And I think that's where the law's getting stuck. And the trouble is, if I was to come out and say right now that in order to get a GRC, you must have surgery, you must have hormones,
Mm.
that's seen as transmedicalist, that's seen as exclusionary. And I agree, there shouldn't be an exclusionary way of doing it. But what we also have to do
Mm.
is recognize that the lived experience of people who've crossed that line, who've been through the the process, whatever you want to call it, to obtain a gender recognition certificate, have had to give up their birth signed gender and acquire it in all ways. And you can't have your cake and eat it. And that's what the Gender Recognition Act is around, this binary. You were and now you are.
But the challenge here is twofold. One, which is what happens to people on their way, because
Yeah,
actually you're
completely.
not until you are in your model there. But also, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? And also, you'll have people who say, I don't want to be either of those things. I just want to be non-binary, for example.
And that's fine. You can
And that is
get on
fine.
with it. Yeah, get on with it.
Uh,
And
but
there
you
needs
can't
to be a place
protect
for
that in
you as
law.
well. Yeah.
My understanding
And
is you can't protect a non-binary concept in law because the idea of being nothing, of not something, is not something you can actually apply a legal framework to.
yeah, Germany and other countries do have an option to have a non-gendered marker in passports and legal
Yeah,
documents. So you can protect the right to have no assigned marker. So you have an X. So you're not
yeah.
actually recognizing someone as non-binary. You're just recognizing someone's right not to put M or F on a legal document, which I think is what Germany does, which inherently means that someone who's non-binary is recognized. And then it's down to service providers and employers to provide facilities that are gender neutral, et cetera, et cetera. So the same sort of challenges. But I think we've had this conversation in the past. There's no easy answer to some of this. It's
No.
where we are now, it is a sticky mess. And if you were going back 20 or 30 years and redesigning the system and redesigning the laws and rewriting this, you would probably do it with today's lens, you'd do it differently. But
Yeah.
I think we've had this conversation before, and the analogy I use is British citizenship as an
Yeah.
example. And if we look at various stages of that, you're born into citizenship from birth, you're assigned at birth, British, whatever that may
Mm,
be. Then you have people who maybe acquire citizenship through their life. Maybe they migrate legally through sponsorship or whatever it may be. They marry, they do something else, they work here for so long, and then they get eligibility having lived in this country for so long. Part of the Brexit deal, they got their rights assigned. So there are multiple ways you can acquire citizenship, and those are very well defined. Yeah, in order
mm,
to become a citizen, you must do this. There's a
yeah.
waiting period. There's a qualification period. There's an
Yeah.
evidence period. Yeah,
The
you must learn English. You must pass a test. So,
mm,
yeah, learn about the prime ministers. You have to learn about stuff that I wouldn't be able to pass a citizenship test. But you have to show that you are going to live as a British citizen and respect the laws of the land and fit in and be able to add value and contribute. So you can't just become a British citizen. As much as you want to turn up at Heathrow and say, I want to claim asylum, I want to migrate, you can't just become a British citizen. So you're not going to get social security, you're not going to get a national insurance number, you're not going to do this and this until you've done something. And we can use the same analogy with people who are trans, gender diverse, and say there is a process. If you want to acquire female citizenship or want to acquire male citizenship, or in fullness time acquire non-binary citizenship, there has to be a process that is robust, defensible,
mm,
credible, believable, and definable. And what you're saying there is how do we recognize people who are embarking on this journey? How do we recognize people who are coming to this country to become citizens? There's an interim period where they're qualifying. At a certain
mm,
point, you're given a national insurance number so you can work. So you have a right to work visa. Yeah. At certain points you get this, and at certain points you get that. Then you do the
yeah.
final test, which is where you stand in front of the flag, swear allegiance on a Bible or oath, and then you get your citizenship certificate, and then you can get a passport. All I'm suggesting is that the gender recognition process should be equally as defined and robust, and it has to be accessible. And I think one of the problems we find at the moment is the process of getting psychiatric assessments or psychological assessments, surgical, hormonal, whatever it may be. Those processes are lengthy, degrading, confusing, and not a well-trodden path. If
Yeah.
you knew that at the age of 18 or 21, whatever age we say, you know that you can download this document and it says, go to this clinic, speak to this doctor, go through
Mm,
this process, sign this legal paper, get on with your life, and then in 2 years, or whatever it may be, come back with all your stamps on the form, and then you can go in front of the flag, take your test, swear allegiance, and there's your new passport. That's
mm,
what's missing is the accessibility of that pipeline. There's the problem.
mm.
If it was accessible, defined, smooth, frictionless, so that everybody could comply, then there wouldn't be a problem.
So
I think.
one of the challenges there
Hmm.
is, and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing at the moment, just investigating this. There's two things. One of the challenges here is that in order to facilitate that process of becoming a British national, the state pays for that. It's not a private thing. And one of the pushbacks for the
You say
process,
that
which
a state won't pay for everything.
no,
If you need to learn English, the
yeah,
state isn't going to pay for your English lessons.
no, but there is the state process. The challenge here, and has always been the challenge, is, and actually what really started some of the mithering around this process was the cost of transgender surgery. And this was 10, 15, 20 years ago. People were looking at NHS budgets and saying, why are we spending so much time on what was called transsexual operations at the time? And there was a pushback at that point. So the challenge with your methodology is that you want, in a sense, to be able to fulfill a state obligation to be something, the state should pay for that. And I think the state would be incredibly reluctant to pay for
Well,
that. So we end up with the same
I didn't
problem. It's who pays.
I didn't say in any of my musings that you had to have surgery. I didn't say in any of my musings that that is the case. There are people who surgery is important to them, and there are people who surgery isn't important, and there are also people who would if they could, but they can't. you know, health, wellness.
is your process going back more like to the real life test in the sense that used to be there? The 2 year moratorium, you used to declare yourself, and then you had 2 years to live in your real self, and then you were given
I'm
hormones and
I'm
such
very
like.
much not trying to say this is my idea of a process.
No,
What
I
I'm,
understand that. We're just
what I'm
discussing a
trying to
process.
say, yeah, what I'm trying to say is I believe there should be a credible and accessible process to follow where people can understand what that process is, how they qualify for it, and what they get at the end. And society recognizes that process exists and accepts it.
Yeah,
So
that's
if
the
someone
key.
turns up becoming a British citizen, they post it on Facebook and go, I'm now a British citizen. They're waving their passport around. And everyone goes, oh, wow, that's wonderful. Congratulations. Welcome to our aisle. And we want the same to happen with gender citizenship.
Mm,
You get to the end of it and everyone celebrates it, and you're not seen as anything other than valid and whatever may be. So that's the ultimate aim of the process I want, is that it's celebrated and recognized and credible and defensible. What that looks like, that needs to be thrashed out, whether there's
yeah,
hormonal, whether there's surgical, whether there's psychiatric, how we evaluate, how we pass someone else's test, because British citizenship has a test, but it's
yeah.
defined and it's accessible. Not everybody is able to get British citizenship. Not everybody will pass that test, as
One of the other
may not
things,
get it.
one of the other things that's also interesting about the British Citizen Test is that it's not held in the minds of psychiatrists. It is so easily understandable that anyone can apply that. It's like a set of competencies or
Yeah.
criteria. You can be trained to understand it. I think probably one of the issues at the moment is because some aspects of transsexual, transgender philosophy come out of the mental health world, is that we have psychiatrists involved in the process. And I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? How do we de-expertise this process? I think is really interesting. For example, any doctor can prescribe hormones and then can measure and it's very inexpensive, and they can take blood tests and measure that. It's not hard, but what's complicated is the sort of cod expertise that needs to be part of this process. So stripping that out, I think, would be important as well.
But it's also defining on where that line you're crossing is. I believe British citizenship, you can still have dual citizenship. You can still
Yeah,
keep your citizenship at birth if you wish. The gender citizenship is a very binary affair, and you're relinquishing and you're gaining. I think all this needs to be worked out, but I personally am not in favor of making it easier and simpler in terms of the process, just that the process needs to be more accessible,
yeah,
less medicalized, less
yeah,
this, that, but still there to be a process. You can't get married or divorced tomorrow or today. In both those instances, in order to get married, in order to get divorced, there's a process. And those are legally recognized processes because your status and your rights change as a result of that process. And your
yeah,
status and rights as a man, as a woman, as someone who's non-conforming, change in the responsibilities you have by gaining that gender citizenship. So I think it has to be fundamental that in order for people to celebrate it, it has to be acceptable and believable, defensible, and realistic. And the window, this Overton window, society has to relate to it as well. I think as much as we'd all like to wake up in the morning and go, I'm this, I feel like this is not about gender identity. This is about how you live your life and how you need to be protected in your
yeah,
day-to-day actions with the government, with your obligations as a person, as a citizenship of this country. And I think that's the important thing. And it has to stand up around the world as well. We can't go off on our own here, although we seem to be going off on our own against the tide. But whatever we do has to fit in with other countries. Because if I travel to India, if I travel to Iran, if I travel to Turkey, I want to know that my citizenship as a British person, as a woman, is also protected.
yeah.
And as it happens, if I went to Turkey right now, I would be protected. If I went to Iran right now, I would be protected.
Mm,
So I was chatting to somebody the other day who is actually Iranian. And so as a transsexual woman, post-operative transsexual woman who has been sterilized, to use another language, I would be protected as a woman in Iran. Okay, I'm not
mm,
saying I want to be a woman in Iran, but I'd have more legal rights in Iran or Turkey right now than I do here.
Yeah.
I would have complete protection. So what we need to do is whatever we do as a country, whatever we do as a process, whatever we do in this act, it has to link in with a global perspective as well. And
Mm.
again, it has to be believable, it has to be defensible, it has to be accessibility. And I think the gatekeeping evolved, the medicalization, the mental health aspect has to be changed.
Yeah.
Recognizing, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have counseling. I think we do. I think I needed to talk to people about how I was feeling and what was going on in my head. I needed to be able to explore this, not for conversion therapy, not to try and dissuade me, not to, but I just needed to actually understand it myself.
Like most people do.
What was going on? What's going on in my
Yeah.
head? Am I crazy or am I this? So I think we need to give people that breathing space to understand who
Mm.
they are. And I remember, getting too personal here, walking down the corridor towards my gender surgery. And that was the longest and loneliest walk of 20 yards I'd ever made in my life because I'd spent weeks and months questioning whether I needed to do this and why I needed to do it. So, what we need to do is make sure those checks and balances are there. And we do support desisters, detransitioners, people who are not quite sure,
Yeah.
people who want to stay questioning, people who want to explore different sides of their gender. And that this binary citizenship of change doesn't have to be for everybody. And that's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay if you want to be non-conforming, if you want to be queer, if you want to be non-binary, if you want to be this, that is absolutely fantastic. And we want to celebrate that. For certain people who want to cross this threshold of this new into this new citizenship, that needs to be another accessibility, which is why we need to maybe define two pathways. One is maybe a reassignment pathway, and one is an
Mm.
identity pathway. And the Gender Recognition Act really is a reassignment pathway, and the identity pathway is more the Equality Act 2010, the gender
Yeah.
reassignment protection in there. And maybe we need to look at that in the law, or maybe we just need to evolve society where being queer or gender non-conforming or being who you are actually isn't a big deal anyway. If we can
Yeah.
get gender neutral loos, we can get rid of all this gender stuff, these sex segregated spaces, then it won't matter anyway. And to quote another analogy, yeah, we look at disability. You've got the social model of disability and you've got the medical model of disability.
Yeah.
The social model says it's society that is disabling me by not providing me accessibility in my
Mm.
day-to-day life. It's society that's causing my gender identity a problem by not creating spaces that are gender agnostic. If the
Yeah.
world was gender agnostic, I wouldn't care. I can be me as much as I like. But as soon as you put a gendered gate in the way, how do I fit?
Yeah.
The signage doesn't work for me. So we need to, again, use the social model of disability, the citizenship test, all these kind of models are well trodden, but each of them is based on accessibility, defensibility, and believability in society.
So how much of this thought process is being reflected in other trans organizations, or are we too busy panicking? And also, second question, and this can't be it. There must be other stuff as well, because actually, whilst I can see this as a potential long-term benefit, we still have to be doing stuff now as well, don't we?
Oh yeah, no, we've got to do stuff now. And I think, again, I think I touched on it earlier that the pushback has to be to employers and service providers. We
Yeah.
need to take this sex segregated, this biological gate and signage out of the equation. And the onus is on employers and service providers now to provide services, facilities, pathways, so that when I or others walk into the building, I don't feel like I've had to choose something that doesn't work for me. I'm taking something reluctantly. Yeah. And I say this to Marie, my wife, quite often that she said, I don't mind using gender neutral loos. I said, that's very easy for you to say. If there's three doors, male,
Mm.
female, gender neutral, you can choose two of those doors.
Yeah.
Somebody else can choose two of those doors. I can only choose the middle door. I have less choice as a result.
Mm.
So yes, if I had a choice of female and gender neutral, I may well choose the gender neutral because it's more convenient.
Yeah,
When I
exactly.
only have a choice of the gender neutral, that's when it
Mm.
becomes exclusionary and othering. I don't have the same choice. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of all of those choices and just have the middle finger. You have the one choice, which is accessible for all. And the guidance that I'm looking at helping businesses work with is that you provide these facilities and say that anyone can use any of them. If you are a, if you are a person, whether either male or female, that wants guaranteed privacy, then use that one because that is a single room. It's got a lock on it and only you fit in it. That
Yeah.
one is always going to be guaranteed as your space where you're in it. These can never be guaranteed. You cannot police people's access to spaces. You cannot guarantee
No.
that there will never be a man in a female space or a female in a man space. It's just not, you just can't be policed unless you have badges, ID cards, biological throats, cheek swabs, or various other things. Because if you can't guarantee it, the only one you can guarantee is the lockability of that single cubicle, and that's yours. So let's create environments where you say there are three spaces, and if you want guarantee, use the middle one. Otherwise, just get on with it.
But what's interesting in the health and safety law, which is more
The
significant than
1992
the
workplace
yeah,
regulations.
yeah. I think as I remember it says something like separate facilities, men and women, unless each toilet is in a self-contained lockable room. So in other words, you don't have to have male and female toilets. You could just have toilets. And in fact, I remember going down to the Bracknell South Hill Arts Centre, and they've got a sign saying toilets. You go in, and you can use any of them. And lots of organizations do that.
The
Lots of
definition of a
businesses.
lockable room, people
Yeah,
have, I've seen this debate on Reddit and other platforms, but
yeah,
talking to architects and surveyors, people who know what they're talking about, a
yeah,
lockable room has to have its own floor and its own ceiling.
yeah.
So if there's a gap at the top or the bottom, then it's a shared floor and a shared ceiling. Therefore, it's a cubicle, not a room. So it has to actually be floor to ceiling on the walls. The door may obviously you can have a gap around the door,
I was
but
going to say, got to
only
be able to get in.
yeah, millimeters, not centimeters sort of thing.
Yes.
It doesn't have to have the sink in the
No,
room,
no, it doesn't.
but it's more defensible if it is. So you
Mm,
can have common sinks, but people could then argue that is a shared space and
yeah,
it gets less defensible if the sinks are outside, but it's still defensible. Yes, having a self-contained room. So if you've got a door into a room that has rooms inside, then
yeah,
that is a gender neutral space. And you stick a female sticker on the outside door, you're doing that for effect, not for reality. So it'd be very hard to defend that as a single sex space. So no
yeah,
matter how much you want to say that. So my advice and guidance is, yeah, where you can have those self-contained rooms, where you can have single cubicles or single rooms that are single sex, disabled, accessible rooms, and say if you're not happy, you're not sure, you can always lock yourself in that one and have it to yourself, like you would in a
yeah,
cafe or
yeah,
a small shop. So there are ways of doing it, and I think, as you say, the workplace regulations are one thing. The Equality Act provides the guidance that the HRC have put out. I can't remember the exact wording, but it's clubs, societies, service providers, and facilities. It's not instructions to employers.
no,
It's about provision of service. You can argue that employers providing a service to its employees, but fundamentally, it's not about the workplace regulations. So again,
yeah,
organizations are being heavy-handed, pushed into this exclusionary method where they're not required to because they're risk adverse, because somebody in their organization
yeah.
is
Threatens.
risk averse and wants to do it
Mm,
differently, and they're gender critical themselves, whatever it may be. But no, we're going to see a lot more litigation here, and I'm already talking to people about how we can provide
yeah,
robust guidance that is inclusionary, not exclusionary.
yeah,
And when I talk about inclusion, I'm talking about for everyone. This is about creating spaces where people of color, people of faith, people of certain gender, people of certain sex all feel comfortable and can feel safe in those environments. It's not
yeah,
about trying to prioritize trans people, queer people, whatever it may be, over and
mm,
above anybody else. But
mm,
it's also trying to recognize that you can't keep everybody happy all of the time. And just because someone's uncomfortable doesn't give them a right to discriminate on that basis.
no,
Uncomfortability is not a reason to discriminate. So again, we've got to look at the proportionate, the legitimate means to achieving the least discriminatory outcome.
yeah. Food for thought. And we've reached that stage where we need to pause again. Anything else you want to say in conclusion, Joe, before we head off?
If you're listening to this, I'd love to hear your thoughts actually. If you've got any thinking on this, how I want to thrash out my own ideas on this citizenship, this idea of gender citizenship in a way that doesn't exclude people, because it's not about being elitist. It's not saying I've had more done than you've done. I've gone further on my journey than you have. There's a hierarchy here. It's not about that at all. It's just recognizing there are certain milestones, certain fences to jump, rivers to cross that
Mm,
not everybody does, not everybody needs to do. But in order to be taken seriously by society, there has to be a certain line that you've crossed that it gives you that citizenship. What that is, how it looks, what the process is, how do we make that work for people? Yeah, it needs to be explored. But
I think my one worry is you could do all of that and still not be accepted because for some people, it's never going to be enough. Whatever you come up with,
oh,
just never going to be enough. And this is part of the challenge, isn't it? It's about finding something which is enough. That's the challenge here.
yeah, but you look at the racism still thrown out to people like Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman saying, you're standing out on a platform trying to get rid of boat people, and then people say, hang on a minute.
Mm,
Are you really a citizen yourself? What happened
mm,
to Barack Obama with Trump saying he wasn't
yeah,
a good enough US citizen? So there's always going to be people who are going to say your citizenship isn't good enough.
yeah.
But as long as the law of the land protects you and will
Protects you.
advocate for you and is
Yeah.
defensible, then yeah, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be out to get you. So yeah, but defensibility, legal status is what we need.
Fascinating. As always, Joe, it's a pleasure to chat to you again. And no doubt I'll be seeing you soon.
Yeah,
Take
thank you.
care.